Hi, everyone. Welcome. So this is the second part of the AWP Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion webinar series. My name is Shreya, and I'm a Senior Program Officer and GEDSI focal point at the Australian Water Partnership. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, traditional custodians of Canberra, and pay my respect to elders, past and present, of all Australia's Indigenous peoples. Before I begin, I'd just like to say that this webinar will be recorded and made available to you all and other people who weren't able to attend today. So we're all here to learn about equitable management of water resources and how we can do better GEDSI in the work we already do. And I thought I would reflect on this year's theme of World Water Day that we all celebrated and marked on 22nd March. This year's theme was Water for Peace. And I think we've all realized that water can create peace, but can also spark conflict. When water is scarce or polluted, or when people have unequal or no access, tensions can rise between communities as well as countries. And as we see the increased impacts of our changing climate and the growing population, there's an urgent need within communities, between countries, to unite around protecting and conserving our most precious resource, that is water. And public health, prosperity, our food and energy systems, economic productivity, and environmental integrity all rely on a well-functioning and equitably managed water cycle. So as we near the end of AWP Phase 2, we have reflected on our work in the region, particularly our contributions to GEDSI impacts and outcomes. And part of this process for us has been to look at the approaches we have taken, and most importantly, identify learnings that can inform and improve our future work. So in the last webinar, as part of this webinar series, we heard from our partners, Aether and DP Hanoi, who contributed through a gender, disability, and social inclusion impact assessment of the proposed amended law and implementation decree in Vietnam's drafting of their new water law. We learned that they were able to provide recommendations to elaborate articles by mainstreaming GEDSI in the law itself. We've also learned about the development of a gender-sensitive and inclusive water resource management plan in Cambodia, which was led by WaterAid, where local partners and stakeholders co-developed an inclusive WRM plan with strong GEDSI components. And so the Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is ensuring access to water and sanitation for all, will not be achieved without a concentrated effort by governments and development sector to put more emphasis and resources towards inclusive and equitable WRM and WASH. The human right to water and sanitation calls for equal rights and inclusion of all people experiencing marginalization. But as practitioners, we need support and guidance on how we do this well. So today we will hear from our partners on their work in Thailand and Papua New Guinea on integrating GEDSI into their work. But before we do that, we would like to share some tools that we have developed with WaterAid to further deepen our GEDSI work and to provide other partners with strategies and best practices for integrating GEDSI into broader water programming and policies that are developed. So we have developed a GEDSI action plan template, which we shared briefly at our previous webinar. The action plan template is a very practical tool to help map out some key GEDSI activities as part of your broader water program. It can be a tool to help reflect on the different output that might not seem very GEDSI specific, but helps you go back to the particular GEDSI action that you put out in your proposal as a way to as a way to make sure that GEDSI is being continually implemented through your work. And it's a very practical step to ensuring that we're working towards achieving more inclusive and empowering outcomes as well as outputs. And we've also developed a GEDSI continuum and an accompanying guide. And that is the tool that we will focus in the first part of the webinar today. So before I hand over to Chelsea from WaterAid to take us through the continuum, I just wanted all of us to reflect on why we need these tools. While water projects are focused on addressing technical and engineering solutions, people must be at the center of everything. People make up the users of these solutions. So without their involvement in design, delivery, and monitoring, technical solutions will fail and will not reach everyone. So GEDSI guidance for water programs helps to ensure we continually take the next step at empowering people who experience marginalization and transforming some of those power relations. I'll now hand over to Chelsea, who's the head of strategy at WaterAid, to take us through the continuum. Over to you, Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Shreya, and welcome everybody. It's been a really wonderful collaboration with the Australia Water Partnership and WaterAid around this GEDSI learning series. On the next slide, you'll see a continuum that we've developed together, which is really drawn on a lot of the learning from Australia Water Partnership partners who've been, all of you who've been implementing this work for many years. And it draws on WaterAid's learning around how we do really good, strong, inclusive and empowering development through WASH programming. Continuums are not new. I'm sure many of you on the call, your organisations may already have your own versions of this. But what we've done at the Australia Water Partnership is to really look at how do we make a continuum that's practical and quite easy to use, and really helps us to think about how we're addressing power and inequality through our work. So with this continuum, if you think about starting at the inclusive level or marker as a minimum standard, so this is really what we would expect all of our programming work to achieve wherever possible around gender equality, women's empowerment, disability inclusion, and broader social inclusion. The inclusive step really is about making sure that we've got diverse perspectives in different spaces and are reaching and including people who may otherwise be excluded. If we move then to the empowering phase or that marker or level of the continuum, what we're starting to look at there is more about looking at how our programs are addressing some of the power imbalances. So not only working with individuals or groups to make sure that they feel confident, they've got the technical skills to be included, they're part of decision-making, but also working with those around them who may otherwise be holding that power already. So for example, working with decision makers in water resource management programs to make sure that they're enabling others with more diverse or different perspectives to them to be part of some of those decision-making processes. The transformative level is very much a long-term vision of what we want to be aiming for. And part of the good practice of having a continuum is to continually try and challenge ourselves to deepen our practice around equality, inclusion, and rights, or GEDSI, as we often call it. So while transformation is much longer term change, and that's when we see a lot of the structural barriers and barriers at different levels be removed. So thinking more about systems level, the individual level, the household level, having a view of what we're aiming for and what that ideal world would look like really helps us then to improve our inclusive and empowering levels and outcomes that we're achieving in those spaces. And then harmful or do no harm. It's really critical to have this level in a continuum because it helps us to understand and monitor and check that anything we're doing around equality and inclusion is not bringing any harm. So taking no action on GEDSI, that in and of itself is harmful because we're perpetuating the inequalities that already exist. But also if we don't do GEDSI without thinking about what some of the risks or backlash could be, then we could potentially be doing harm. So it's really critical that we understand what do no harm looks like in practice. And as we move from inclusive to empowering towards transformative on the continuum, we continually look at what harmful is and what that would mean. So this continuum is meant to be a really practical guide. It can be used in so many ways. It's a really great training tool to use to help sort of raise awareness and build understanding through workshops. It can be used as a design tool to map out what activities could be done, what outcomes could be achieved under each level. It can be used as part of a monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework to help inform what those outcomes are and how you would measure them. And it can be used as a really great reflection tool as well. I would say you don't have to be starting a new program to pick up and start using a continuum. You can certainly start mainstreaming it into existing programs to help reflect on what GEDSI outcomes your program is achieving. And maybe just to say that in the guide that we've developed, we really do go through a lot of these concepts. It looks at what power is, what harmful social norms look like, and different groups thinking about women's empowerment, disability inclusion, social inclusion. It maps out some really great practical actions that can be taken through water resource management, water programs, and climate change programming as well. So what we'll do now is move into hearing about some of the great work in practice. So I'll hand over to Isabel Davis, who's a wonderful water and development consultant and has really led the write-up of these case study series. So really looking forward to the conversations with colleagues about their GEDSI work in practice.
Thank you, Chelsea. It's great to be joining you all. This has been a really great initiative with the Australian Water Partnership based on the demand that was expressed from partners in order to share and be able to further understand good GEDSI practice. Because as Shreya outlined, we're in real agreement about the importance of it and how critical it is in order to achieve the aims that we're all working towards. But how do we do it? And can we share some examples of that? So we're really pleased to have 5 case studies that we've developed. So as previously mentioned on the first webinar, we launched the ones from Vietnam and Cambodia. And today we are being joined by partners from 2 other of the case studies, from one in Thailand and one in Papua New Guinea. So I'm about to introduce the case studies and then welcome the partners joining us today. We're going to have a moderated question and answer discussion to bring these case studies to life. And then there will be a moment for questions from the audience. So please feel free to put those into the chat as you go, and Chelsea or I will bring those into the discussion. We have some of the case studies live on our website and the others will be up there shortly. One point of note on these case studies examples being launched today is that they are actually quite large programs, and the GEDSI components might just be one part of that much larger program. And that's the section that we're focusing on today. But we just want to mention there is a wealth of information about these fantastic projects. So to dive into, we're going to start with the case study in Thailand. And today we are joined by GEDSI advisor, Professor Helen Johnson from Griffith University, based in Australia. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you, Isabel.
So as part of ongoing collaboration between Thailand's Royal Irrigation Department and Australia through the Australian Water Partnership, Australia and Thailand have undertaken an experience sharing and knowledge exchange to support reservoir water quality management in Thailand. The activity has included technical advice, 2 workshops, an exchange visit, and the initial development of reservoir water quality monitoring manuals. GEDSI was a key feature of this activity and led by a GEDSI technical expert, which is Helen. A GEDSI context analysis was undertaken and subsequent planning and training done to ensure that due attention was given to addressing GEDSI and improving the skills of partners for ongoing programming. This case study discusses how GEDSI considerations are really important in the Thai context, because people there, as in many parts of the world, and particularly women and people with a disability or those in vulnerable groups, are the ones that are facing the negative impacts of a changing climate, for example, increased flood risk. So, Helen, it's really wonderful to have you here with us, and as the GEDSI technical expert in this case, could you talk to us about your role as a technical expert or advisor and what that really involves?
Certainly. Generally, a GEDSI technical expert provides advice about how a project can be designed, planned, implemented, and a GEDSI-specific monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan and activities can also be created to ensure that GEDSI is a key component of all relative activities. With this particular project, this project required advice on how to include all members of impacted communities and the water users groups that are specific to Thailand. So some examples may be that it may include reaching out to peak bodies, such as persons with disability organisations, as well as organising for women with children from the community to attend. It may include how to organise engagement sessions, such as planning for times when women can attend, rather than planning for times when they're actually cooking meals for their family or they're otherwise engaged. And it can also include the kinds of questions to ask. For example, the Washington Group's short set of questions about self-identified disability can be extremely helpful, and also more specific questions about the context that you're engaging with, such as why women are not in positions of leadership in the water users groups. I find from my own experience that GEDSI advice is particularly important for any design and planning around climate change and disaster risk management projects, because there's a lot of policy which is extremely well written, but it's written predominantly by men. And there are little to no practical activities that include GEDSI groups as a consequence of that numeric male domination of policy writing. However, as Isabel has mentioned with one of the case studies that's available, the Pacific case study provides some helpful examples about how to actually include GEDSI into climate change and disaster risk management projects.
Thanks, Helen. It's really great to hear both generally and specifically about your work in this case study. I guess we're interested to also understand how you champion GEDSI with partners, particularly if there is a large variation of understanding of the levels of GEDSI, which is quite often the case, and particularly when you're running training with the different levels of expertise in the room.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the key learnings I have made over the last 30 to 40 years is that it is very difficult to champion GEDSI with partners. I think that it's important to recognise that and not to think that it's going to be a simple process. This is particularly true in countries where there may be social and organisational dynamics that minimise the contributions of women and members of socially vulnerable groups. So when I become aware of that as part of the context, I tend to use a three-pronged approach to reach people, because people see their world in very different ways. So I may begin with a moral, ethical, or religious approach that works with ideas about Buddhist philosophy or Muslim or Hindu ways of thinking. And this actually then enables people to use their own moral frameworks to think about being inclusive and embracing other people. And I find that that works extraordinarily well in countries such as Indonesia, for example. But beyond the moral and ethical and religious approach, I always try to use a legal and human rights-based approach that links back to the political and legal responsibilities of government departments or civil organizations. So that might be by bringing to the attention of the people I'm training the international conventions that are signed by their specific home country. And those conventions can be the Convention for the Rights of the Child, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and the Convention for the Rights of Persons with a Disability. And I find that people who work in government organizations find that legal human rights-based approach to be very, very helpful, and one that they can use to lever an understanding of why they need to be more inclusive. When I'm engaging with civil organizations or civil commercial companies, I find that a commercial financial approach is often quite useful. So that is that it's more cost effective to build infrastructure, to design programs and implement projects to be inclusive from the start, because that's generally about a 1% increase in costs, rather than trying to design it in such a way that you need to retrofit. And retrofitting can cost up to a 30% increase in costs, or with some companies where there are very, very damaging social impacts, to pay compensation for damage, which can move into the multiple millions of dollars. So there's a variety of different approaches that we can take that I think blend very well to actually improve people's understanding of why GEDSI is important.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. I guess coming back to then this case of reservoir water quality management in Thailand, could you give us an example of some of the GEDSI advice that was given in order to strengthen the activity?
Yes, certainly. So for the Royal Irrigation Department project, we created a specific GEDSI checklist of actions and questions to ask at community engagement sessions, and a report card as to how effective GEDSI actions have been. So, for example, the checklist covered project management actions such as strategy and planning, concept and design, implementation, performance and evaluation, and cross-cutting issues. And we also added risk management, because very often clients will look at risk management in relation to their own organization. But DFAT now requires a risk management analysis to cover not just the implementing organization, but also the potential negative GEDSI impacts on communities. So that risk management step is very, very important in terms of project design and management. In terms of the list of questions covered, we looked at pre-focus group actions, such as explaining what GEDSI is, identifying the specific GEDSI groups in any particular community, identifying how best to consult with communities on the project decisions that will impact them, and then also explaining specifically what technology may mean in relation to irrigation. So that may be, for example, in Thailand, dry and wet season management. It may include drip irrigation. It may include training on suitable water use in some cash crops like potatoes, and how to use tractors to repair canals and so forth. So we're actually drilling down to quite specific contexts and the needs of local communities.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. And perhaps just if you could elaborate a little further on the GEDSI context analysis process that was undertaken in your experience in this particular case study. I'm sure our audience would be interested.
Thank you. Yes. In terms of a context analysis, I did find as a GEDSI specialist that I had a limited amount of time to do a context analysis, as I was brought in towards the end of phase 1 of the project, when the lack of GEDSI actions have become quite noticeable. And I think as specialists, sometimes we do find this. It becomes a little bit of a panic employment at some stage in some projects. For me, the GEDSI actions therefore primarily became about training up some of the Royal Irrigation Department staff via a major GEDSI training session, providing the aforementioned checklist of actions and questions to ask about GEDSI issues, and then drafting a report card for staff to use so they could judge whether future GEDSI actions would be effective.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Helen. I'll just see if there are any questions from the audience. But I guess, Chelsea, while you're checking that or coming in, we just wanted to ask one more question about your learnings and experience from the project. If you had I guess, a GEDSI learning that you'd like to share, or your experience of working in partnership to achieve GEDSI aims and objectives.
So I think in this particular case, working in partnership has proven to be very productive. The case study did find that there were very few female employees in the Royal Irrigation Department, and the ones who were employed were very much at the lowest level of employment. There were very few women in decision-making positions and in positions of power in terms of being scientists. And that's very much because the department is a component of quite a hierarchical society. As a consequence of there not being any GEDSI mainstreaming within the department, there was very little to no recognition of what GEDSI is or how to engage in GEDSI-sensitive activities at the community level. So what we actually have found is that it's become an entry point for organizational change and for learning how to enact GEDSI within community engagement activities. And GEDSI now has been taken on board by many staff members in RID, and the learnings have been welcomed. So we're seeing that it's been a process that has created a partnership that will move into the future, and I think very progressively.
Thanks, Helen. It's really great to hear the case study that you've just elaborated, because as Chelsea was introducing the continuum, the projects, particularly the AWP supports, find themselves at various stages along that continuum. And it's wonderful to see, no matter where programs are on the continuum, but that they are moving towards the transformative program and sort of deeper equality goals. So thank you for sharing that. I'll just check with Chelsea if we do have any questions from the audience at this time. If Chelsea, let's check in with you to see.
There's no questions yet from the audience. Maybe people are still processing some of
taking it all in. Well, it's wonderful to have Helen with us. As mentioned, the case study write-up will soon be available on the AWP website. So if audience members would like to read further about that, AWP certainly welcomes any follow-up or questions on that. But thank you again, Helen, for your time joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to move over to a case study in Papua New Guinea, and we are joined by GEDSI officer Glenda Yakuna from WaterAid PNG, based in the Wewak district. WaterAid is an international NGO focused on water, sanitation and hygiene. Welcome, Glenda. I'll just briefly introduce the case study, and then again we'll ask Glenda to bring it to life. So the Australian Water Partnership has supported the strengthening of climate and water resource management data in the PNG National Wash Monitoring System. So building on efforts by the government of PNG, the National Wash Coordinating Body and WaterAid to develop a national monitoring system and bring stakeholders together, this activity has aimed to support, scale and further those efforts towards a more inclusive climate resilient wash services and water resource management in PNG. So the activity that we focus on in the case study has included adding or enhancing climate, water resource management and inequality data into the monitoring system, and then training and capacity building for government and rights holder organisations on the monitoring system, as well as further promotion and meaningful inclusion and participation of marginalised groups in the broader water resource management and climate change efforts. So it's a really interesting case study that brings together a whole range of efforts in wash and water resource management. Glenda is going to talk to us about the activities to encourage inclusion, because WaterAid, with government and rights holder organisation partners from the Wewak District WASH Committee, they have developed a new district community water resource management engagement manual. It's called Healthy Villages Community Wash Engagement, and it brings those threads that I mentioned together for community engagement. So welcome, Glenda. Would you be able to tell us about this manual that you've developed and what it aims to do? Sorry, you're on mute, Glenda. Get you there. There we are.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I'm really excited to talk about the manual. Yes, we've actually developed a manual in collaboration with two rights groups, two rights holder organizations, and we have the Pacific Council of Women, that's a women's rights group, and the Pacific Disabled Persons Agency, which is the disability organization. Yeah. Actually, the manual is made up of 4 modules, and it includes activities such as the community water point mapping, and also it has women's and men's group transact work, water quality testing, water point as identifications, water resource estimations using storytelling, and then simple calculation of volumetric, water volumes, and then simple climate change impact mapping. So these approaches have been integrated with locally used behavior change approaches to sanitation and hygiene promotion, namely the Healthy Island concept, and also this community-led total sanitation. So the community-led total sanitation basically talks more about the defecation sites. We try to discourage open defecation. So that's around community-led total sanitation, where community takes the lead in mobilizing themselves to ensure that they have pit latrines and all these things. So it discourages people from openly defecating in the communities, and then that's where like that gets to affect water sources that they have in the community. So those are some of the activities that are incorporated in the manual. So and then looking at the GEDSI aspect of it, the manual, it aims to raise community awareness and understanding of GEDSI issues found in gender and power analysis integrated GEDSI, including community action sessions about the gender division of wash labor, equitable community water allocation, and analysis of barriers to equal access and participation. So WaterAid has actually contextualized the packaging approaches into one tool with several modules, like I mentioned earlier. There are 4 modules. So the approaches are context specific, and then also the tools are designed for use by rights holder groups based on their needs. So we've tailored the manual to make it more simpler so that the rights holder groups can understand it well and they can implement it at their level out in the communities.
That's great. Thanks, Glenda. It sounds like a really comprehensive manual and that you've worked together in partnership to develop. Could you tell us a little about the role that the rights holder groups played in designing and developing the manual?
With the 2 rights holder groups, they were initially involved in the development stage of the manual. We had interviews with them. They gave in the inputs on certain activities which they feel that is more practical at the community level, and their inputs were incorporated into the manual. And then after designing the manual, we took them through a 1-week intensive training. We trained them on how to deliver the sessions out in the community. The objective was to build the capacity and then the understanding, and also the understanding on the different sessions that is captured in the training manual. So we try as much as possible to get them to understand the sessions, and then there were also practical sessions involved in the training as well. So they get to do, for instance, the water quality testing and all those. So like with the training, that was like something really new for them. So they were really excited. And then we also took them out for the practical part of it, the pilot part of it. So they were actually involved in implementing the trainings out in the community.
Yeah, that's great. I know that in the case study that we've written up, how those groups have really strengthened their facilitation skills and their confidence in order to be able to deliver these community engagement, sort of wash and water resource management activities. So that's really fantastic. I'm just wondering if you could also share with us some of the impact that this approach that you've taken has had on those people that are experiencing marginalisation in the communities.
Yeah, in terms of the impacts of the approach of all the initial trainings, after all the rollout, and then also being out at the field and with the engagement of two rights for the organizations, it really like most of the communities had limited understanding on how they could work along with marginalized groups like with people with disabilities. So once they receive the training, people start to understand the barriers that affected the people with disabilities and those with other marginalized groups like women and children and all the elderly people out in the community. So they tend to realize and appreciate appreciate them, and then people start to involve them in the communities as much as possible, get them involved in community meetings, in community activities, and then these people, they feel that they're part of the community, and because of the training, people understood that their views are important in any decision making, and in terms of resource allocation, or in terms of any what's in the community. People start to realize that when there are issues being taken on board, the barriers, communities start to understand the barriers, and communities start to help them to address barriers. So they were able to access wash services that are in the community. And then also they fully participate in implementing the activities, the action plans in the community. So those are some of the things that we saw. While doing the training, they were also actively in the training. They also giving inputs to develop community action plans, and then they felt that they have a responsibility. They felt that they can be able to contribute to the development of the programs in the community.
That's great. Thanks, Glenda. So it's really interesting to hear about the activities that were undertaken at the community level. And we understand that in this case study, there was also, as part of building the enabling environment for inclusive and climate resilient wash and water resource management, that there was also the efforts to strengthen the national monitoring system. Just wondering if you could give us an example of some of the GEDSI indicators that were recommended as part of that process to review the monitoring system.
After the review of the wash monitoring system, the technical working group identified 11 GEDSI indicators which were initially not in the WASH MIS, the National WASH MIS, which that was included into the that were included in now in the national MIS system. So we had example of we had 2 examples of the indicators, GEDSI indicators that were included. One is the percentage of women's representation in community decision-making processes, and the other one is percentage of communities where water collection is shared between men and women. So those were some 2 examples, or 2 of the GEDSI indicators that were included in the WASH MIS. So yeah, those indicators were actually they were used to develop the data collection forms, and then with the other 9 indicators, they were used to develop the data collection forms, and then the information from the forms were later transferred into the MIS to be used. So to date, I think 2 districts have used the data. They've collected the data, and then I think from the case study, we had already results of data collected from the 2 indicators that I've mentioned earlier. So we are looking forward to collect more data on the. We're happy that we now have the GEDSI indicators in the database, and now we can really collect information and then measure the GEDSI outcomes. And then also 2 of the districts have already used the results to cost their district WASH plans.
That's fantastic. It's really great to hear about that iterative process to sort of strengthen the monitoring system. And as you say, now that with the data coming in, that's contributing to decision making and better programming. So thanks for sharing that. And there is further information in the case study write-up. And as mentioned, these case studies will be available on AWP's website shortly. So we'll just check in with Chelsea if there are any questions from the audience at this point for Glenda.
We don't have any new questions for Glenda, so I'd really encourage people in the audience, if you've got questions around things that you find challenging in GEDSI or areas that you'd like to learn more, we've got 2 amazing experts online who could share with you. There is one question that we do have for Helen, sorry. Isabel, do you want to go to that question for Helen? And then perhaps if we get more for Glenda, we could also come back to Glenda. Great. Fantastic. So Michael Simon has asked a really interesting question for Professor Helen around, do you see evidence or more interest or involvement of younger people in GEDSI as distinct from more senior folk, perhaps? And so Michael has said that perhaps, or often, it can be a useful entry point. So interested in your perspectives.
Yes, it's interesting because I think just generally one would expect young people to be very open to these kinds of ideas. And my experience suggests that certainly amongst women who are aware of structural or systemic bias, they are very much aware of GEDSI and are happy to make changes. However, it isn't something that you can actually take for granted. And more broadly, in my experience, I've had pushback from women in relation to, for example, the employment of people with a disability. The idea that somehow people with a disability are not being employed through a meritocratic approach, but are just being employed for diversity reasons. So even though I would like very much to say, yes, there's generational change and one can use that, it isn't something that we can take for granted. So I think that initial raising of awareness is actually very, very important. I think it's also really important for us to understand that meritocracy is embedded in so many government and private organizations that it's actually quite a conceptual leap to move from meritocracy to diversity. And it's considered a threat to whoever happens to be in a position of some power. And even when I was doing community engagement last week with a Brisbane-based organization, we did talk about this need to balance the idea of meritocracy, people who have skills and knowledge, but who often look like a particular kind of person. In Australia, they often look white and they often look male. So how we actually expand that out to say there are people who bring a diverse range of life experiences which can actually enhance the organization or the commercial company. So I think that's very important. That said, when I was speaking with the project director around this particular project, he did say that when word went out in northern Thailand, that the Royal Irrigation Department environmental team was actually doing some work on a reservoir. 200 women on motorcycles with bandanas around their faces turned up, actually sequestered the team and started to say, this is what we need. You need to listen to us. You are not doing things correctly. So I think often from the community, we can also get this amazing push from their lived experience about what's going wrong and what they need from organizations. So it's a little bit of a troubled answer, but I think that it's definitely younger people can be of assistance, they can be progressive, but their knowledge can't be taken for granted.
Thanks, Helen. We've had a comment from the audience that it's great to hear the rich experience from both you, Helen, and Glenda today. So I guess I just wanted to give the opportunity to both you, Helen and Glenda, if there was something that you came to say today and you haven't yet had the chance on the case study or your GEDSI experience, just for final comments. First to you, Helen.
Yes, I think in my case, I've probably covered a minuscule amount of learnings from this particular project. And I would like to just go blah and to give everybody the benefit of those learnings. But I think that Glenda also picked up on the need for us not only to have GEDSI right from the beginning of designing these projects, but to actually have specific indicators when we're monitoring and evaluating what we're doing. It's incredibly important that they are actually written into any MEL plans. And I think the other thing from the project I've actually worked on is that we have made a specific recommendation to the Royal Irrigation Department in Thailand that they actually employ more women, they employ specifically more female scientists, and that they actually employ more female communications officers. Because even though the science that they're doing is very, very good, it's not actually getting out to the people who need to know what's actually going to be happening to them when an irrigation project is put up. And that may be a major dam all the way through to canals being built into various villages. Climate change is bringing increased flooding as well as drought to Thailand. And so these ways of incorporating and being more inclusive are absolutely imperative to the way in which Thailand progresses in this area in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. And Glenda, was there anything further you'd like to say today?
Yes, I'd like to say something more on the climate change impacts that are affecting the communities, and then also how it's affecting the people with disabilities or marginalized groups in the communities. It is extremely challenging when we have the people with disabilities, marginalized groups have already been affected, normally affected, with the accessibility, barriers around accessibility, to wash services and all this. So, once the climate change impacts come on board, the hazards come on board, it really doubles the challenge of the caregivers of the people with disabilities. So it's really a community effort that you really need to identify those barriers, those hazards, those impacts, negative impacts that come about because of the climate change. So, and then as well as, try to, as much as possible, to educate the caregivers of the people with disabilities or marginalized groups in the community as much as possible on how they could be able to support well the support, provide that support, necessary support to the marginalized groups so that they can be able to live a normal life as other normal people do. So that's the one thing I've learned around, the impacts of climate change coming, having it on whatever that's already affecting people with, marginalized groups in the communities.
Thanks, Glenda. That's great. We have had a question come in while you've both been sharing your wisdom. Thank you. And it's just a question around reaching the most disadvantaged. The question is that often GEDSI and efforts in addressing bias are alleged to create sort of a niche of individuals who are often a bit more well endowed or accessible than actually really disadvantaged groups. So the question is, have you seen that happening, and how might you address that when trying to reach disadvantaged groups?
Certainly, Glenda, you go.
Thank you.
Sorry, Isabel, can you come again with the question?
Yeah, I'll see if Helen has a response, and I'll send you the message, Glenda, so you can read that one too. Helen, go ahead, in your experience.
Yes, and I think it's an excellent observation. And certainly I have engaged with people who have been either women who said there are no problems here, we're absolutely fine, we've got by on merit, through to women who, as I indicated earlier, do not want people with a disability who don't have the supposed or alleged skills and knowledge to be employed. And I think that it's not possible to create a perfect process that's going to be perfect from the very first time that you enact it. I think that actually raising awareness can be helpful. I think that that approach of using ethical and legal and commercial arguments for inclusion and diversity can be really, really useful, particularly in training. And I also think that from my experience, particularly in Indonesia, once it is pointed out that particular kinds of people in positions of power are not addressing the needs of other members of society, there's this, oh my goodness, we didn't know that, we didn't understand that. And when we've given them some tools about how to do that, they've actually been really comfortable and gratified and capable of using them. So with one particular project, once they realized that they weren't including people with a disability, they actually contacted a local organization. A woman who ran that organization came along to the local public works department meetings, and they found her information to be so useful that they actually now invite her to their monthly meetings. And so she then disseminates that knowledge that she gains back to the members of her organization. So there's not a perfect process, but there are steps that can be progressive over time, I find.
Thanks very much, Helen. I'm conscious of the time, that we're approaching the end of our allotted time, and I would just like to very briefly introduce the Pacific case study, but I'll give Glenda the moment to, if you'd like to add anything on this question today.
Yeah, looking at how we address bias in the community, actually with those looking down at the people with marginalized groups or disabilities in the communities. We actually conduct sessions on looking at barriers in the communities and the importance of engaging people with disabilities and having them give their inputs on how that affects their like we educate communities that the marginalized groups also have the same dignity. They have to be valued as much as possible as the normal people, so they can be able also the communities with the sessions that we conducted in the trainings that really help people to understand the barriers and then make decisions on how services can be distributed equally to people with disabilities and people with special needs in the community. So like in a way, we educate them that if we don't consider them in whatever service that we do, it comes back, it brings on more challenges, more everyday challenges, workload to the caregivers, especially in the community. So so in that way, and then also people were educated on barriers that affect the disabled or the disadvantaged people in the community. So in that way, they understand, and then they tend to appreciate them in the community. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you both, Glenda and Helen, for joining us and sharing your expertise today. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Just very briefly, I'm going to mention the third case study that we're launching today, which is one in the Pacific region. It will be particularly interested to those who would like to look at a case study of a flash flood early warning system. So AWP is supporting the Pacific community and the Alluvium Group to lead an activity looking at strengthening flash flood early warning systems and taking a GEDSI approach to that early warning system. It's a really great example of having a GEDSI advisor and lens from the design phase of a program right through to regular check-ins and monitoring to make sure that that lens is applied. And there's some really other interesting examples around their stakeholder and community engagement with working with local rights holder organisations also in the Pacific region into catchment areas. So highly recommend that case study as well. And I'm conscious of time, so I'll hand back to my colleague Shreya.
Thanks, Isabel, and to all the panelists. I think we've had some really enriching discussions and some valuable insights. We've heard and learned about taking different approaches to GEDSI, like the three-pronged approach that Helen mentioned, looking at the context and seeing if you can have a moral, legal, or a human rights approach when you think about trying to get entry points to talking about inclusion in water management. And certainly great point made there, Helen, on being, this is more cost effective to us than trying to retrofit later on. And certainly the benefits of working with communities and rights holder groups, as Glenda mentioned, and as we can see, and you'll see from the our Pacific case study, on trying to design inclusive programs from the get-go. All our case studies will be made available on the website. There's some that's already available. I think everyone in the audience will appreciate that some of these programs are currently running. So, we're drawing from outputs that are just being released and reported on. And that's why, there's been some delays, but they will certainly be up on the website by the end of the week, including the tools and resources we've mentioned. And the tools and resources are a work in progress. And we certainly, Chelsea and the AWP team, we certainly welcome any feedback to those tools, especially for practitioners who think there might be a better way of framing something to help you use those tools in your programs. And I think before we close the webinar, I just want to thank all our AWP partners for your continued support and efforts to ensuring sustainable and equitable management of water resources. I would particularly like to thank all the case study contributors that we heard from in our previous webinar, all our panelists, particularly thanks to Isabel and Chelsea for leading the development of the tools and for leading the write-up of the case studies. Also thanks to our GEDSI experts on the expert review panel who continually support our work and give us insights on how to do better GEDSI. And of course, the AWP team and the AWP communications team, because it's a huge effort in putting together webinars and writing up case studies and designing them. So thank you all. We look forward to hearing from all of you and possibly sharing more about our GEDSI work in the future.